The only prediction I can make is that being able to adapt and change is the only thing that's going to make you future-proof.
My guest today has been an innovation manager for much of her professional career, which means she deals with change. But her life experience makes her insights incredibly special. On top of that, she's an author, a keynote speaker, and she's got an MBA from Harvard. So super big brain, but loves helping people. Today, Daphne Leger is my guest on Everyday Great. And we're going to talk about how to deal with change in your life. Great day, everyone. I'm Mike Pawlawski, former world champion quarterback, serial entrepreneur, and award-winning TV producer and host. I've lived a life dedicated to mastery through performance and mindset integration. Each week, I'll bring you the insights, strategies, and stories from some of the world's top performers to help you unlock your greatness. Whether you're an athlete aiming for the top or an executive driving your team to victory, this is where you learn how to train your greatness to become an everyday great. Now let's get after it. Daphne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike, and for sharing your audience with me.
Absolutely. I think it's so important that they hear it now. We think about all the changes going on in the world, AI, and there's wars and politics. Like, there's so much going on around us all the time. It seems like human existence just speeds up. The further and further we go along, the faster things get. And so understanding how to adapt to and work in this constantly changing environment is so important for people at home. And so being a change expert, I knew that you would be perfect for the audience. Tell me, for people at home, what does that mean, a change expert?
Yeah, basically, I've been exposed to a lot of change in the way that I was brought up from a very young age. And so that repeated exposure kind of gave me a lot of practice with change. And then as soon as it was up to me to make the decision, perhaps surprisingly or not, I just kept going and I kept adding more and more change to my life. So at this point, I've been through a lot of change on a personal and professional level. And then when it became part of my work, because my work has been really focused on innovation and there's no innovation without change, I became pretty obsessed with the topic. And so I've been analyzing and researching this topic and then talking to experts about it for a while now. And it comes from the expertise at this point, I would say comes from first personal lived experience through all that exposure to change, and then just like a passion and obsession with this topic that has led me to deep dive into it. So that's where I would say that change expertise comes from at this point.
And you're, like you said, lived experiences. Your experiences add so much to this, and coming from the innovation field, like innovation is all about change. It's all about things moving forward. It's all about creating new, unique solutions, right? So talk about how those two things tied together. Tell people at home a little bit about your background, rather than just, I've been through a lot of change. Like, your change is real. Like, people don't get to do this in their life.
Yeah, so I'm originally from France. My mom is Indian, so I was already a bit of a mix to start with. And then we started moving around within France when I was really, really tiny. And then we moved to the US. You and I have in common Berkeley, because that was the first spot that I landed. And then we moved to India, where my mom is from, back to Berkeley, then to Canada. So a lot of changes, like in the very early stages of my life. I did the math once, and I've been to 14 schools. So I was the new girl and kind of changing everything about my existence every few years. And so that was the early days. And then I started working in innovation. And innovation really, I can't really think of how you could possibly innovate without going through change. It's pretty much a requisite. And so as I was focusing first on innovation in my work, and I started first in international development and then in the business side of innovation, I started realizing every time that we're doing innovation, we're doing change as well, or at least we're trying to. And anytime that it doesn't work out, often it's because we weren't able to do that transformation that was necessary. And I started realizing this relationship that I have to change, which honestly, at this point, if I'm being nice, I'll call it obsession. And if I'm being real, I'll call it addiction. At this point, that's where I'm at. And I've realized so many people are on the completely opposite end of the spectrum and just feel super uncomfortable with change and worry about it and try to avoid it at all costs. that's the normal, natural reaction to change. And so I realized I think I can help people with my very particular relationship to change, transform their own so that they can embrace, unlock, and even drive change in their lives and at work.
That's fantastic. It's one of the main premises of my book is that we are always training, right? We're training our nervous system. We're training our thought patterns. We're training our habits all the time with what we do. And whether we think we are or not, we're training. And it strikes me that as you say that, I can hear the training in your upbringing where you become used to change, something that people fear. You become used to it. And you said it yourself, you become addicted to it. What do people miss most? I mean, when they're thinking about change, what are they missing when they're scared of it?
Yeah. I definitely want to come back to the idea of training because I think that's where you and I connect the most in our
Absolutely.
philosophies. But on the point of what people are missing the most, I think that people don't realize that their reaction to change is actually coming from some really old wiring that we all have. So it's not like, oh, I'm so special, I'm for some reason not excited about this change. It's, no, you're a human being. That's why you're not excited about this change, right? It comes from really basic kind of survival mechanisms that we have built in that basically make it so that most of us will have a first natural reaction, which is, I don't want to do this because I don't know what's on the other side of this change, and it might be death and destruction, right? A bit dramatic, but that's the way that our system works.
That's the lizard brain, right? We don't know what we don't know, and we're scared of the unknown. Our brain can't predict, like it's always spinning predictions, but as it spins predictions, if it doesn't know what's on the other side of the curtain, it spins some crazy predictions that almost never come true.
Yeah, it's going to assume the worst. There's even a term for it. It's called catastrophizing. So when you're thinking like what's on the other side of this must be a catastrophe. It couldn't possibly be just neutral or maybe even better than what I've got going on here. So I think that's what most people miss is being able to step back from themselves, observe and say, oh yeah, everything that's happening right now in my initial reaction is just natural kind of old wiring. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that I think people miss is all of us, when we're going through change, we're doing some quick mental math and we're thinking, what do I have to lose and what do I have to gain? And we do that, whether it's consciously or most of the time unconsciously. And then whatever that calculation spits out, we say, okay, I'm either for or against the change. We think we're like really good about this and that it's 100% rational. There's so much that's going into that calculation that is biased and that is kind of skewed against change because of, all that old wiring. And so once you understand those two things, you can kind of recalibrate and reframe things so you can get on the other side of them. It's not that we're, we'll come back to the idea of the training, but it's not that it gets easier. It's always hard. It's not like people who train a lot go to the gym and are like, oh, I'm not feeling anything. This is easy breezy. No, it's always hard, but you know that you can do it. And that makes such a difference to get through it.
Yeah. And if it's not hard, your body doesn't adapt to it, right? That's the whole point. That's the human body. If you push hard, if you hustle against resistance, your body adapts to make that job easier the next time once it becomes a pattern. And so I love when you talk about the brain and the brain reacting, and I put it in my book, the pluses and minuses category, right? And everybody always tells you pluses and minuses. The only problem is our brain thinks in chemistry. It doesn't think in data, right? It doesn't think in single chunks. It thinks in big packets of information that are whole concepts at a time. And that comes through stories, the stories that we tell ourselves, right? You told yourself the story of being able to adapt to every different place that you move to. That's training. I know you just said you want to come back to training. That was training you to be able to change, to be able to adapt. Talk about that concept of training.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of amplify it, but also say I wasn't the only one involved in my own training, obviously, especially at a young age. I had parents who presented every change as an opportunity and an adventure. And I mean, I remember it was always, and I'll say this, even though it has connotations, spun as something positive. And so as a child, I didn't know better. That was the framing that I was receiving. And so I was like, okay, here, let's go, another adventure, right? It didn't even occur to me to think about all the negatives because they were not being presented to me in that way. And so I think that way of perceiving change stuck with me, and I was trained to, whenever change comes at me, think more about the gains than the losses, and kind of discount the losses as most of them being perceived, being imagined, being you were saying stories that we tell ourselves. The other day I was talking to a psychologist about this, and she was saying interpretations. We treat everything that goes through our minds as fact, and so little of it is. Most of it is interpretation, right? And so I think that's what's happening when people do that pluses and minus, losses and gains. They're thinking, oh yeah, facts here, facts there. And if you double click, there's actually so many things that are interpretations of yours that you can then realize how many biases and assumptions or limiting beliefs there are behind those interpretations that you can then kind of work through and get past.
No doubt about it. And you think about all the things in your life, right, that have freaked you out. It's a big test. You're so worried that you're going to fail. You lock up and you incite your nervous system, right? No, this is going to be bad. And then the stress response kicks in. And then, ooh, that feels bad. And then it picks it up a notch. And then like, oh, what am I thinking now? And eventually you start to dissociate, right? You get test anxiety and you're freaked out. You feel out of place in the room. And that's your mind catastrophizing. That's your mind going down that road, exactly the concept that you were just talking about. It's that chemistry. It's the big stories, right? We see the pictures. We can see the fatality at the end of the tunnel when all we have to do is put our heads down and work on what we have in front of us. So it's such a big thing and such a huge piece for people. Now, you talked about being the new girl in school, right? But you also, like, I'm going to brag on you a little bit. Harvard MBA, super smart. You talked about being in Berkeley, right? That's an environment that you grow up in. Talk about how environments enrich people.
Interesting. Yeah. I think the first thing that happens when we arrive to a lot of these environments is the good old imposter syndrome. And so I want to be super transparent and say that when I arrived to Harvard for my MBA, I felt like a total admissions mistake, and I thought at any point someone's going to say, oh, wait, how do you spell your last name? No, we didn't mean you. Get out of here, right? And I remember that at one of the first kind of town halls that we had with all the new admits, one of the leaders of the program in the university was on stage saying, we know that you're thinking you're an admissions mistakes, but just so you know, look left, look right. Those people are thinking the exact same thing. So like, let go of that story because we're all feeling that when we arrive here. And I found that fascinating because it turns out you can go to the highest levels and the imposter syndrome still exists. You never conquer it. It never goes away. You just learn how to manage and deal with it. So I think those environments are incredible. And you and I are part of circles as well together where, there's really high level people doing amazing things. And there's that moment where you think, what am I doing here? Do I belong here? But I think most of the time those environments are incredible because they push you up or they pull you up and you start to be surrounded by a context that is showing you what is possible. And it's amazing as you go through the imposter syndrome to say, wait, the person next to me is feeling the same and is a normal human being just like me and yet is achieving amazing things. And so it makes it possible for you to consider that you might be able to do those things as well. So I found that in my case, that's what happens most of the time when I get into those rooms or contexts where I think, what am I doing here?
Yeah. And when you unlock it, that's the key, right? When you unlock it, exactly what you're doing for people. Going to get into that in just a second. For people at home, we're going to talk about how to unlock that piece because I think that's such a big part of it. Remember, if you want my pregame checklist, what athletes do to get ready for games, right? And we're talking about this coming up here, unlocking your nervous system so that you can play free. Just text GREAT to 55444. You can get that. Get on that email list and we'll send you out bites from all of our guests and share out this show. I mean, this show for so many people, especially now, AI coming in, businesses changing, models, like everything going on, change is so important. So we are here to help people. I am obsessed with helping people in my life right now. I am literally obsessed with helping people become better. I know from our conversations, Daphne, you feel exactly the same way. And so I'm passionate about it right now, and I really feel it. And so if you can share this out, more people that can hear this, the more people that can get on board, and give us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. What do you want to hear? What do you need to hear? So getting back to that conversation, you talked about that imposter syndrome. And what I love about imposter syndrome is we all think we're the first one to have it. So when we talk about change, this has been here since the history of time. The Stoics wrote about it. I mean, people have, it's in the Buddhist philosophies. It's in, the Tao. It's all in there, and you can see it. People have been trying to regulate and optimize and program human behavior for years with different behaviors. And doing what you're doing now, it makes you a philosopher. How do you feel about that?
That's a fascinating term that no one's used on me before. All right, let me absorb that and see how that feels. Interesting. My first reaction, I want to be super honest, is, oh wait, no, I want to do practical things. I want to do applicable things. So philosopher doesn't sound like that. And yet, I think as I grow older, I'm realizing most of what's going on in our lives is going on in our minds. And so if you can understand that and kind of unlock and hack that, then things, transform around you. And so I like it. The only caveat that I would put is that I'm a philosopher who has a strong inclination for action.
Sure.
I don't want to.
When I say philosopher, I don't mean you're just sitting on a mount spewing out sermons. You're a teacher. You're in part. You are somebody, an educator, somebody who is helping people, right? You're a healer in parts as well too. But the great lessons that we've learned through history, the Stoics were philosophers, but they were also acting every day. They were also imparting that wisdom and teaching and training. And so I think when I say that, I don't say it in that negative, we have made philosophers a negative term, but I'm saying it in a very positive term because helping people is an amazing thing. We are, as people, programmed biologically to help one another. Matt Lieberman wrote a great book about how we have a social culture and how we interact with one another. And it's literally programmed into our brain. Our brain has architecture that helps us and makes us want to help people. Talk about, as you help people, what you get from this.
Yeah. I think you and I are wired in a very similar way. Like you said, I get so much satisfaction and fulfillment from seeing, I talk about it this way. I love seeing the light bulb turn on in people's minds. And whenever, I'm giving a keynote at a conference, or I'm running one of my workshops or one of the retreats on the topic of change, when I see people kind of their eyes light up and they say like, oh, I can do this and I can do this right now. That's everything to me. That's how I know that, out of this small intervention, if you will, that I had, there's going to be an impact that's going to multiply. And I've had people, come up to me right after an event or a keynote and say like, oh, you just changed my way of thinking. Like, I'm excited about what I'm going to go do with this. And, that makes my day. And then I've had people come back, 2 years later and be like, I'm still thinking about the way that you presented this concept. And I just think that's the greatest gift. Like that, the fact that that's the way that I get to interact with the world and have impact is such a blessing. And I absolutely love it. It's really what I feel in flow when I'm doing that, when I'm sharing these concepts and unlocking that potential in people, and seeing that impact is everything.
Yeah, it's so great. It's what I miss most about that team environment, which is why I do what I do now, is that ability. When you hear people saying, oh, you were living inside his brain, they usually use this in this negative context where, you're on somebody. But when you're living in somebody's brain is a good thing, right? When you're making it better, it's so powerful. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it right now. It's such a good thing. And the people who have done that for me, I am so grateful for those people. I can think back to my rookie year, and I can think the quarterback ahead of me at Cal, Troy Taylor, was a phenomenal mentor for me who, although I don't know that he was thinking about doing it at the time, he completely changed the course of my life, right? Parents, coaches, Mike Daly, my head coach of the Arena League, these people who lived in my brain, who still live in my brain because they were a positive influence. It was super powerful. And it's, I love the fact that you're doing it. I see it. I know it in you because I've seen it in you. I've seen you talking to people. I've seen you working with people. And so I love that fact about you. Tell me, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
If I'm somebody who's scared of change, how would you start working with me? What would you do with me?
Yeah. So I would invite you to come to one of my workshops or one of my retreats, because it's funny, you mentioned the idea of the environment and how we help each other. I tend to do this in groups because there's something magical that happens when we're doing it in a group. And I have so many dynamics and exercises that need a group. And that's where you're like, oh, now I get it. Now I see this, because you see how the group around you is interacting with these concepts and these challenges as well. So that's the first thing. But yeah, basically what I do is I go through a series of exercises so that you can kind of start to understand your own relationship to change and everything that we've talked about, you know, your wiring and what's going on when a change comes at you. I also work on, you know, those change. There's different types of changes. There's the changes that are kind of imposed on us that come from the external world, and that's what's happening faster and faster these days, and it's just coming at us like faster, bigger every time. We're in the era of exponential change, and it's exciting and terrifying all at once.
Right.
So that's one type of change. But the other type of change is the change that you seek out, you know, the chosen change. And that sounds so much easier because you're choosing it. So many people are absolutely stuck with that. It's like, I want this change, but I can't make it happen for myself or for my organization or whatever it might be. I'm clear on the fact that I want it to happen, but I'm also just waiting for it to happen. And so we attack both of those. Those are incredibly important and valuable, and require maybe some different thinking and tactics. So we go through a series of exercise, and people start to realize and get throughout the workshops and the retreats, like different tools and tactics and reflections that they can use. And then the biggest thing, and I think you'll like this because we're going back to training, is that I leave them with training homework, if you will, you know, like I call it changeability activation. You have to activate during this workshop, and that's what we do, or the retreat, but then you have to practice, right? Just like any athlete will. And so changeability practice is what happens after this intervention of ours. And so the changeability practice is an invitation to, throughout your daily life, figure out how to infuse it with change here and there, and start to deal with it. If you practice change in all the small little ways that you can in your life, when the big changes come or you make them happen, you're going to be so much more equipped and prepared. So that's where that practice comes in. And there's so many benefits to that practice beyond just your relationship with change. Since I'm coming from the world of innovation, I also kind of come at it from the angle of the power of breaking habits and routines in order to unlock new patterns of thinking and inspiration and all that stuff that you need for innovation. And so I find it super powerful to do the changeability practice from that angle as well. Just let's break some habits and some routines. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because it's fascinating. I've been struggling with this contradiction of like, we need habits and routines. And I'm sure you're going to tell me as an athlete that you 100% agree with that. And I'm also the poster girl for breaking as many habits and routines as possible.
So right. 100% agree with that. So here's the way it works, neurobiologically speaking, from an athlete's perspective, okay? We have to form habits because our brain can't take in all the information that's out there. There's so much, I'll call it data, but it's really information, the way we process it, right? We take it in electronically, we process it chemically, it goes back to electronically, and we're processing all this information. And so you have to train habits. And when I teach a young quarterback, and I still coach young quarterbacks because I love watching young men get better at what they do. It's amazing, it's powerful, and it's life-changing for them in terms of confidence. But you start teaching them foot placement, right? I start from the ground up. So you start teaching them foot placement. At first, they feel awkward, they feel off, they feel like imposters, and they can't get it. It's not consistent. And then after about the fourth rep, it locks in a little bit. They make that neural connection. They start to feel it. And then after the second week, it starts to become natural. I can tell when a quarterback has really ingrained it because I have them do bilateral movements. So they'll do right-handed if they're right-handed, and then I turn them and have them do it left-handed. And when they look as good with their offhand as they do with their on-hand, I know that neurobiologically, they've created the neural pathways to create that movement as a habit. They no longer have to interpret all those signals at the same time.
Right.
And so once you're at that point, you own that skill. Now, you're not mastering it, but you own the skill. You can do it without thinking about it. Now, here's where breaking habits comes in, because once you have that, there's a tendency to compartmentalize it and not pay attention to it, not dust it off, right? And so it can get stale. It can change without your knowledge. You can start to develop bad habits within the good habits that then change everything that you're doing. So with the quarterback, there's a takeaway step. And when you take that first foot away, you want it to go straight back. Well, as guys start thinking about other things, because they already have this movement mastered, they'll start to step in the bucket. They'll over-rotate and close their hips, right? And I'm breaking this down in terms of a single movement for quarterbacks because it's easy to illustrate that way. But you're not dusting it off. You're not polishing it up. You're not keeping it clean. And so you need to put some focus back on those little things every now and then, break some habits to reinforce it. And what that does is it recruits neural connection. It recruits attention to that. You release neurochemicals, dopamine and cortisol and adrenaline and all these things that help you make connections, help you create new neural pathways, help you myelinate nerves that then help you fortify that movement. And then every once in a while, you got to take it off the shelf, dust it off, right? Clean it up, break some habits, right? The rule that reinforces the rule. You break the rule to prove the rule. And so you do that to keep it fresh, to keep the learning fresh, to keep yourself engaged so that you can continue to put attention on that habit. And it works for quarterbacks, but it works in everything that we do. And I love the fact, exactly what you're talking about. It's exactly how it works. I always, as an athlete, was constantly looking to optimize my behavior, my patterns, my movements, my skills, all of that stuff. And because I was a kid who had cystic fibrosis, because I was really sick in a hospital, biology and medicine had a real firm hold in my head. And then I could see, even at an early age, where the biology and the psychology and all of that overlapped. And so I have a lifetime of thinking about these things and studying these things. And now with all the new neurobiology that's out there in the fMRI imaging, it's amazing. So I didn't mean to go on a rant, but that's like exactly what you're talking about. You can just see the perfection in your system based on what it is that you're talking about, training people.
Yeah, I love that. I hope you don't mind, Mike. This is your podcast, but I might quote you on on that because, yeah, it's a brilliant example. I hadn't heard it applied to athletes in this way, but of course I've been studying and analyzing this in other contexts, and like you said, it applies everywhere. For example, pilots, right? They everything. My dad's a pilot, so I learned how to fly when I was 11. I was too young to be to get my own license and fly solo, but I was ready, right?
That's something else, by the way, we share in common. I got my pilot's license as well. Yeah, I didn't know that either. That's funny. See, this is why we love each other. This is why it's so great. This is why there's the connection. I love it.
Amazing. Okay. So, as you know, when you learn how to fly, everything is protocols and habits before you even get into the plane. Like it's amazing because it literally is life or death there. Right. But what's interesting is, and it's important because if an emergency happens, you need those people to be doing without thinking, just like you described with the quarterbacks. Right. But what's interesting is we fall into a little bit of that complacency that happens when you overuse habits. And so airlines often change the routes of their pilots up to get them out of that kind of autopilot that they're in doing the same thing over and over a bit too much. And I think that applies to our lives. It's great that we have habits. I mean, it's great that you don't have to overthink brushing your teeth. It just happens and you could be solving a math problem at the same time. And yet that autopilot can be negative if you apply it to everything all the time, and therefore you're no longer conscious of anything that you're doing. And so I find it fascinating, like you said, to think about when do we break the rule? We have habits, and the way that I think about it is there's conscious rituals, like you've decided to do this because it adds value to your life, your work, your team, whatever it might be. And then there's unconscious routines or habits that are just like, well, we just have been doing this way, and I don't even remember why, but we always do it this way. And obviously, I want to question and challenge and break those, the latter. And that's, I think, super powerful what happens when you start to question those.
Yeah, it's amazing. And just to add on to your point, it's also why airlines have checklists. I don't know if you've ever read that book, Checklist Manifesto, but
Yes.
it is a fantastic book because you get complacent. That's what our brain does. You can't process all the information. So the more that it can create efficiencies is how I call it in my book. It creates efficiencies for our body so that we can move through things. But when you have things as detailed as flying, you have to have that checklist. So literally pilots have to go through each line on the checklist for everything they do. And some of these checklists are like 135 points long, but you have to do it because it's so important. And so having both of those systems is how our brain works. Our brain
100%.
wants to have simplicity to what we do. At the same time, it craves learning. It's always looking to solve the next puzzle. And that's where that whole fear of the unknown comes in. And so,
100%.
and so finding that combination that works for you, a huge piece of improving when you're in that stage and creating those habits is belief. Believing that you can get through it, believing that there's another side. So when the unknown is out there, the unknown is not scary. How do you work with people about that?
Yeah. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think through the what you call training, what I call practice, is where that belief is formed. It's, I often, when I go through big changes, or kind of very dramatic or radical changes, even if they're smaller, I find myself feeling that there's a faith that I'll get through to the other side. And I call it faith because I don't really know what else to call it. It's belief. It's whatever, something like that. Confidence. And it seems like it's not based on facts because, like you said, most of what's on the other side of the change is an unknown. There's few facts. And yet, what I think it's often based on is previous experience with change. It's not the same change. I've never been through this. Change is always difficult and it's always new. And yet, I have in my baggage all of these changes that I have gotten through and that I have gotten on the other side, and it gets me through the new and different ones. And so I think that the best thing that people can do if they're feeling like they don't have that confidence that they can get through changes is start to practice with tiny little changes that are not as terrifying or scary and build up that confidence. Because like with most things in life, practice makes perfect. And so if you start to realize that you've done it, you're ready to go to the next level of change and you can kind of ramp up from there. There's a concept in psychology that I don't know if you've heard. It's called exposure therapy. It's a method that is used for when someone has a fear, that they need to or want to work through, right? I'll give you an example that another psychologist I was interviewing for my book was telling me about, which is someone who has, for example, a fear of heights, right? The first thing you do is don't go bungee jumping with them. That would be terrible, and that phobia would be set for life. So what you do is you show them a picture from a second-story building, right? And then you go stand on the third floor and look out the window, and so on and so forth. And eventually you're on the, rooftop of a 6-story building and we're getting through and pushing through that fear. I think the same thing applies with change. My idea with the changeability practice is that we're exposing ourselves little by little and growing in our confidence and our ability. And it's not change for change's sake. I want to make that really clear, right? There's no value inherent in change just for change, but I do believe change is the key to growth. And so therefore, if you're looking for growth, which I hope most humans are, then you're going to have to go through change. And so that's why I want to practice change and get better at change, because it's the key and the necessary path to growth and evolution.
Okay, brilliant. So people at home, I hope you go back and rewind that and listen to that again, because brilliant. That is so you're saying things and I'm writing them down because they hit on all the key points that people need to understand about everything. You asked about exposure therapy. There's a story in my book, and I want to talk about your book in just a second. You said, the title's brilliant. I love it. But how people can get it. But there's a story in my book, Everyday Great, where I talk about as a kid going on the parachute ride at Knott's Berry Farm. And it's funny because you hit on fear of heights. I got in there, and the human instinct initially for everything, the base instinct is to freeze. People always say fight, flight, or freeze. Well, it's freeze first. That's the nature of us. That's the lizard brain. You lock up and you freeze. Well, as a kid with pneumonia and in a hospital bed in an oxygen tent, I learned to freeze. I learned that response. That was a control mechanism. And I got in that parachute ride, which took you up to like 250 feet and drops you from the sky, and you're in this tiny little basket. For today's protocols, there was no safety in this thing whatsoever. And scared to death, literally froze in that basket. And so it was a form of exposure therapy for me. But we did go bungee jumping for the very first. You're right. We went right away, and you got to see yourself going up in this thing the whole time. So it was insane. I got through it. I survived. I'm here today, so don't worry, don't. But it was that was my first exposure to exposure therapy, and it was crazy. So that was great. We started in there with a question with belief and with faith, which you were talking about, and I love that, because that's that approach or avoidance theory, where you're either in this place where you want to avoid it, you hide, you freeze, you don't have control. You're in here, you don't have control. Or you want to approach, you want to put yourself out there. And it comes from the confidence, the faith that you were talking about, and that training. And I think that's it. What type of things can people at home do in terms of training small things? And then after that, I'm going to talk about your book, I swear, because I can't wait to read your book. But after that, what can they do? What little things at home can they do to get into that approach phase where they're out there, where they feel confident?
Yeah. So I think there's lots of little things that we can do in our everyday lives to infuse our lives with some change without going bungee jumping. You can, and I've done it, and I would most welcome people to as well, but that's not what I'm talking about at all, right? So let me tone it way down and talk about everyday things. For example, the music that we listen to. Right? It turns out that our brains love to play a little game where they're predicting what's next when they listen to music. And so when you're listening to that playlist that you're so proud of, that you've curated and you know every single song on it, your brain is just like, oh, I know this already. There's nothing to pay attention to here, right? So if you listen to music that you are not as familiar with, and that can be genres or from different parts of the world, whatever it might be, your brain starts to pay attention again. That's a little kind of routine change that you can do. Along those lines, the food that we eat, right? We even have a term for it, comfort food. And that's amazing to have food that is just so comforting because you know exactly how it's going to taste, the texture, everything about it. And it obviously has some nostalgia with it. Amazing. But if that's all day, every day for you, your taste buds are bored out of their minds, right? So what about eating something from a culture or just a restaurant that you've never tried before? Or when you go to your favorite restaurant, how about not ordering the dish that you've been ordering for the last 20 years and just mixing it up, right? Again, your brain's going to light up as it pays attention to what's going on. The paths that we take, the routes, most people go from A to Z in the exact same way because they think they've found the best route, right? And I'm talking about driving to work, driving back from your kid's school, etc. What about mixing those routes up? You're absolutely going to see something that you haven't seen before, whether it's that cute little cafe that you've never driven by or anything like that. And sometimes, and there's studies that have shown this, you'll find a route that's even better because you just explored and tried something new, right? So those are little examples of things that are in our everyday lives. And it's great to have routines, but every once in a while, if you feel like one has gone into the unconscious habit and you're no longer, being stimulated at all by it, what about mixing it up?
So great and so easy, right? Training habits that are so easy to dust it off and to kind of get yourself reacclimated to learning again, to building all those neural pathways. So fantastic. Future Proof, the name of your book. Awesome. Like you couldn't have nailed it better than that. So Future Proof, how adaptable humans navigate change, correct?
Yeah.
Tell me about the book. I can't wait to read the book. It's just knowing you and knowing the tools and what you give. I just can't wait to read it. But tell people at home what to expect in your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited about this. This book is me doing my own change practice and change activation. It's a totally new medium for me. I'm a speaker at heart, and so I'm challenging myself with the writing format, and it is a fascinating journey. So I'm learning so much by doing it. And it's really, a book to equip you and prepare you for change. And it's a lot of the concepts that we've been talking about here. So I've shared some of them, but obviously we go into a lot more detail. And there's a lot of stories and a lot of interviews with some amazing people that are experts, from the business world, from psychology, neuroscientists, etc. So there's a lot of really good nuggets in there. And as I said, yes, okay, fine. I've accepted that I'm a philosopher. So there's those aspects, and it's also super practical. So there's, checklists and key questions that you can ask yourself, and a lot of practical things, because I don't want to leave it as like, okay, I understand this conceptually, and now I will keep it in a drawer and see if at some point it gets applied magically. It's like, no, let's go and do this tomorrow, right? So that's what you'll find in the book. I share a lot of my personal journey and stories as well, because it's just chock full of change, and so I serve as patient zero on all of the things that I'm talking about. But yeah, that's the essence of the book. Why future proof? Because at this point in our evolution as a species, change is coming harder and faster than it's ever come before. The era of exponential change, as we saw. And so I firmly believe there's no more hard skill that you can learn that's going to prepare you for the future, because it's just changing so fast. And so I make no predictions about the future, because we can't at this point. The only prediction I can make is that, therefore, being able to adapt and change is the only thing that's going to make you future-proof. So that's the skill that we have to hone. And the exciting thing, which I talk about in the book, is you have it in you. As humans, we are incredibly adaptable, and we can change. We've been doing it throughout our entire existence. So I think it's just a matter of activating it. And that's what this book is. It's a guide to activating your change ability.
Yeah. And again, this is exactly where you and I cross over in everything that we do. That's my whole High Achievers protocol is about that, right? It's adapting. You are always training because you are always adapting. Now, whether you're training yourself to be better or training yourself to be worse, your body's adapting, period. And so if you focus that adaptation, and in weightlifting, they call it periodization, right? You do little hard things, more harder things. Eventually, you can do really hard things. Whereas if you do softer things, and you get softer and softer and softer, and then you want softer things, and if comfort's your main goal, then you're going to be pretty soft at the end of all that, because you're not doing hard things. And so that adaptation, that change, the ability to adapt is really the magic of being human. And I love that. Where can people find you? Because they have to have the book. You have to hear more from Daphne. You can see how brilliant she is. Just having her on here, just amazing. I love that you came on, by the way. Thank you so much for coming on the show. But tell me, where can people get a hold of you? Where can they find more of this philosophy and practice?
Thanks, Mike. It's been a blast chatting with you, and I'm loving all the points that we find in common. We're coming at this from such different angles, but arriving at very parallel kind of concepts, and I think that's a really good sign. So where can you find me? LinkedIn's a good spot if we're on the kind of professional side of things. So you can find me as Daphne Leger on LinkedIn. And then I wanted to do something special for your audience, and so I prepared a snippet from the book, if you will. It's the practical guide, to breaking habits. So since we talked so much about that,
yes.
If that's of interest, I would love to share that with your audience, and they can go to daphneLeger.com/future. So that's DAPHNE.
We'll put the link down below. Yeah. Sorry, spell it out.
Yeah, DAPHNELEGER, daphneLeger.com/future. And if they hit there, I will make that guide appear in their inbox magically. And it's just like one of those first steps that you can take to figure out what are the habits and what are we going to do about them. So I would love to get that to your audience.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll have all that information down below in the show notes and everything else. You have to get out there and get a hold of Daphne. It's, again, fantastic. I can only give you a little piece of this here in terms of what we're talking about, but you can see the brilliance in everything that she does. And that's why, I wanted to have you on. I love your philosophy. I love your concepts. I love your energy, just what you bring to people. I know how much you care. So super important. People, make sure you get there. Don't forget, you can always text GREAT to 55444. Get the pregame checklist. Learn how to optimize your nervous system, right? Bring that stress level down, get back to that point where you're in that approach phase, playing free. we got it in there to show you how a professional athlete gets ready for games, how they can manage it every single time, because you do have that imposter syndrome before a game. There's fear in the tunnel. But if you want to learn how we manage that as athletes, hit that great 55444, get that checklist. Daphne, so awesome having you on. I appreciate you. We're going to have you back on. When the book comes out, when it's ready, we want you back on. I want to talk to you about it. But it's fantastic having you on. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was a blast chatting, and I'm excited to see also all the exciting guests that are coming soon on this podcast. So thanks for making me a part of that community.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I hope you learned a lot today. And again, share this out because we're trying to help as many people as possible. You can tell Daphne's heart. I'm obsessed with helping people be better. That's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to do. And so share this out with friends. Share this out with people that you know. Somebody who may be in the midst of change right now could get a lot out of this. Understanding how to navigate that, understanding how to handle that, super important. As always, we appreciate you guys watching because that's why we do this. We are fulfilled when we can help people at home. And so that's what we're trying to bring to you. Part of our team. I love being a team player. It's part of what I did my entire life. So having you as part of my team at home, Daphne, having you as part of my team was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening here today. Don't forget, hit my website, text GREAT to 55444, but do what you can to optimize your outcomes by living every day